Hello and welcome. Today we have the beautiful Lou Kelle joining us. Welcome, my love.
Thank you, Nova. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Lou is one of our teachers at the Brighton studio. She's a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher, a life coach. You run beautiful retreats as well. And we're really thrilled today to talk about highly sensitive people. So before we dive into the topic, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you as a teacher. You told me off camera that you've been teaching for 10 years, which is amazing. And I guess we'd love to hear about you and your mission with teaching and coaching.
Amazing. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Nova. Yes, so I've been teaching for, I believe it's 9 years, teaching yoga. Before then, I was actually a school teacher. So I've been teaching for a long time, but yoga for almost a decade. And I live here in Melbourne. And yeah, love working with the whole yoga community. But recently, in the last few years, my focus has really become all about supporting highly sensitive people, which I identify as.
So full disclosure, yesterday when Lou and I were messaging, she told me what we're talking about today and I had no idea what HSP or highly sensitive people was. And so I did a bit of a deep dive into it and it was really interesting to me and I'm looking forward to unraveling. So how did you find yoga as your personal practice and career?
It's an interesting question. So like I mentioned before, I was teaching school at the time and my mum's always done yoga, so it's always been in my world. But back then when I was a kid, when she was doing it, yoga was really, really uncool. It was very fringe and not many people did it. We certainly didn't have the beautiful studios like Warrior One back then. So it was always, there was the seed of yoga was planted when I was a kid really. And then in my 20s, and I started having some just challenges in life, the things that we go through when we're in our 20s, heartbreak and just anxiety, just your own personal issues. And my intuition was to head to the yoga studio. Instinctively, I went there. The actual time I really, really got into it was when I was living in Hong Kong and I was doing a university exchange and I was feeling really overwhelmed and really anxious. I had no personal space and I found an amazing yoga studio. And so I started practicing regularly. I was going 5 times a week and I experienced a huge transformation in my nervous system. So I got back from that experience and about 4 years later, I decided to train as a yoga teacher because it had transformed my life so much. So I love to share this practice.
Oh, I love that. So you mentioned that you're a coach specifically for women or who identify as highly sensitive person or HSP?
Correct. Well, I work with women who are soulful and sensitive. So it's been my just experience that the women who are attracted into my world and to my work are highly sensitive. So I've really kind of curated my offerings around this. And also I have a very a lived experience of understanding what it's like to be sensitive. And I've worked out what works for me as far as supporting myself. So I love to share that with others.
I love that. And I mean, what does it mean to be highly sensitive? How do I know if I'm that?
It's a really good question. And it's something that I really like to frame first up in saying that there's nothing wrong with you if you identify as highly sensitive or you come to find out you're highly sensitive. It's not a diagnosis, it's a self-identification around it. I'll give you a little bit of the science because I think that's important. So high sensitivity was discovered in the 90s by a research psychologist named Elaine Aron, who's the pioneer of this work. She was studying temperament, not specifically sensitivity, but she found in her study, her research, that around 20% of the human population has a trait of being highly sensitive. And there's an acronym DOES, that really sums this up really well. If you want me to go into it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the D stands for a depth of processing. So think about all the senses that come into your body, like sight, sound, touch, all the sensory inputs going in. But in a highly sensitive person, their brain is working overtime to process that information. So you can think about it, you know, when you've got your laptop computer and you're trying to open too many programs at once and it does that whirring sound and you're like, stay with me.
All the tabs.
All the tabs are open. And so it's like, that's how I experience and how I like to explain that overwhelm. So the depth of processing, there's a lot going on in the brain of a highly sensitive person. It's getting stored away. The O in the DOES acronym is overstimulation. And I like to preface this by saying this is the only part of being a highly sensitive person that I think is a negative, and it can be managed. So with all of that stimulation going into the brain, there's a tendency just to become overwhelmed. We commit to too much. If we do commit to too much, it can feel like we get overwhelmed, and this can present as anxiety, which I experienced in my life for, I think, most of my 20s. I was just in this state of overstimulation and overarousal because I didn't have the right boundaries or habits in place.
Yeah, so you're living in almost like a fight or flight.
All the time, right. So that is the negative, that's the downside of it. The E in the acronym for a highly sensitive person is emotional and also empathetic. So highly sensitive people, we feel emotions more, we feel the sadness, the grief, the despair, as well as the joy and the elation and the love. Like our range of experiencing the world is so big, right? So there's pros and cons in that. And also, the empathy, it also stands for empathy. So understanding what other people are going through and really putting ourselves in their shoes. This can be good in a way that we can understand what the people in our world are going through, but also we can also take on other people's problems in a way that's unhelpful. And the final letter in the acronym of DOES is S. So this stands for sensitive to the subtleties. So a sensitive person will feel, for example, these lights that are on me right now, really, really bright and can be overstimulating. There's also sounds. Have you ever experienced like a dripping tap that's just driving you crazy? For a highly sensitive person, this would just feel like, would send them insane.
It's like a hammer. Any type of sound, but also changes of season, we will notice. We could also notice changes in our own environment, things in the people around us. We will notice things that other people won't. And this is why highly sensitive people are really great analysts and predictors of trends and things in the world because they just notice the detail. Yes, I listened to that, and there are so many things, particularly with overwhelm, that I can relate to, especially like you said, if you pack your day too much and then at the end of the day you feel kind of frazzled, right? Mm-hmm. Yesterday I actually went on your website, we'll link in the show notes if anyone wants to take the test, and I did the test, which is a self-diagnosis of answering 27 questions, is it? If you identify yes or no, or strongly agree or strongly disagree. And out of 27, I rated a 3, which is obviously on the very low end of the spectrum. And I was just saying to Lou, like, does that mean I'm not a sensitive person? Does that mean I'm not empathetic? And, because I definitely relate to some of those attributes, but I don't necessarily clearly identify as a highly sensitive person in regards to this test.
Absolutely. And you are definitely an empathetic and sensitive soul, Nova. And these questions and the link that Nova's talking about actually come from Elaine Aron's website. So it's not my test, it is hers. And it's just really good to get an understanding like where you fit on the scale. It's a spectrum. Like any spectrum, we fit somewhere on it. At the lower end or the higher end. Do
you want to share what your score is?
I'm a 22.
22 out of 27. So you're in the top.
Yeah.
And you treat people or work with people, I shouldn't say treat, but work with people that are 27 out of 27?
I do.
Wow.
And I don't, like you say, it's not treat because I'm very much not about looking at this like it's a problem. It's actually a really beautiful trait. The trait is actually neutral. And whether we live in a way that is detrimental to that trait or live in a way that supports that trait depends on how our life is, really. Yes.
So HSP, or highly sensitive person, how is yoga or meditation, or the practice, relevant to these people?
Great question. So yoga was the thing for me that I started doing intuitively that made me feel the best I'd ever felt in my life. And it's something that I have made my career and my whole world because it's the thing that soothes the nervous system. It allows us to regulate, it allows us to breathe and slow down and just create moments of calm, that parasympathetic nervous system response. And that allows us to just feel good in our body. It stops that overwhelm and it's healing.
And again, I don't identify, I'm a 3, but I also feel those same benefits from yoga, particularly if I've stressed, or I've been highly stimulated, or I'm in overwhelm, or any of those emotions that feel too much, and I need to down-regulate my nervous system.
Yes. And just like you say, Nova, even though you don't identify as a highly sensitive person, you still get overwhelmed. And so, like we were saying yesterday when we had a chat, that 100% of people get overwhelmed, not just highly sensitive people, but in this modern world, it's so common to feel like at the end of your tether.
Yes.
You know, all of the stresses and pressures that we have in this modern life, we need practices like yoga, meditation, yoga nidra, that allow us to just downregulate.
Yes. So what are the best styles or types of yoga that you'd recommend for people that are feeling highly sensitive?
Yeah, so it depends whether the highly sensitive person is in a state of overwhelm. Because if a highly sensitive person is feeling like good and they're in a manageable situation, I would recommend all styles of yoga, including like a strong vinyasa practice. I wouldn't disclude any of these practices. However, if a highly sensitive person is in a state of overwhelm or over-arousal, I would highly recommend a yin practice, a meditation practice. I would recommend yoga nidra. I would recommend you bringing eye pillows and blankets and creating softness around the body in your yoga practice, whether that's a yin or a yoga nidra, and just allowing yourself to just be really gentle on yourself, not doing any practices that are heating or overexerting.
I love the idea of grounding and going sensory more inwards by bringing eye pillow. I love that because I actually don't own one at this present time, but I remember when I did have an eye pillow, just that act of putting it on Shavasana for 5 minutes makes such a big difference, or putting a blanket over yourself or a bolster on top of you in Shavasana, just that grounding makes a big difference.
It does, and highly sensitive people are very attuned and aware of their surroundings. So for example, even just this soft chair, like this feels like so nice to lean against. And so things like having blankets and props in the studio are really helpful. And so yes, bring an eye pillow. There's also another practice I wanted to just suggest, and it's that of just the yoga philosophy. So another trait, which I haven't mentioned yet about highly sensitive people, is that we have a really rich inner world. And so when we read philosophy or like the mythology of yoga, it really impacts us at a deep level and it resonates deeply. So I would say, even if you're in a space where you can't access the physical asana, there's so much depth and complexity in a yoga practice that can come just through reading, or, you know, coming to like a bhakti practice or a kirtan.
Yeah, I love that. And what are the practices that you do, you know, to work with yourself when you're feeling like this?
Like yoga practices or
Both on and off the mat.
Well, I would say one of the best, obviously yoga has been a staple throughout my life, and it has like allowed me to thrive as a highly sensitive person. And I use it as a toolkit, so it depends how I'm feeling on the day. And I'm pretty self-aware at this point. If I feel like I've got some energy, I want to stir some energy up, I'll go and do a stronger practice. I love yin, I'm obsessed with yin. I'm really getting into yoga nidra now. I've known about it and taught it for a while now, but I'm going deeper into this study because I think there's a real magic to yoga nidra, and it's needed at the moment for that deep healing. Yeah, but also things like walking, connecting with friends, getting really good sleep, eating well, like these are all life practices that are helpful. Being by the ocean, barefoot walking, like all those things.
Grounding, earthing.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I have definitely learnt so much in the last day of this, and it's been so great to share. Did you have any other last tips or tricks or insights for anyone listening that is relating to this and maybe feeling this way?
Thank you for having me, by the way. I would say just that even if the listener listening doesn't identify as a highly sensitive person, maybe this has ignited in their mind that they might have someone in their life who might be, and this information could be helpful to share, but also just for them to understand. One little, I guess, a visual or a metaphor that I love to use for a highly sensitive person and a non-highly sensitive person is the non-highly sensitive person can be, an analogy is a dandelion. So a dandelion is a beautiful flower that can pretty much grow anywhere. It could grow in the crack in the pavement. It doesn't take a lot of care, but it is prolific and it is very hardy and strong and resilient and beautiful. And also in the flower world, on the other hand, is an orchid. We've all had an orchid and tried to keep it alive in the house.
They are very hard to keep alive.
They're hard to keep alive, but they're so beautiful, and given the right conditions, they can bloom. Like there's amazing orchid, gardeners and farmers who have these beautiful gardens. So they're a little bit rarer, they're different. They're also in the flower family, but they just show that two different types of people or flowers can just take different conditions to be their best versions.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing and thank you for coming today.
Thanks, Nova. Thanks for having me.